Thank you to BMO ETFs for sponsoring this video. So about 6 months ago, I made a drastic change to my investment strategy. After nearly 20 years or so of owning individual stocks, I used to own a portfolio of about 25, 26 individual companies. I made the switch to an entirely passive ETF portfolio as I figured it aligned better with my current investment approach. The fund that I chose was ticker ZEQT, the BMO All Equity ETF. This is what is known as an all-in-one or asset allocation ETF. And in this video, I'll talk about the benefits, I'll talk about what attracted me to this approach, and what my experience has been thus far holding this ETF. And for me, the first benefit that I want to talk about today, it's this reduced mental load that an ETF like this provides. Now, this isn't exclusive to the ZEQT ETF that we're covering today. This is applicable to a number of different investors who take this more passive ETF investing approach, but an all-in-one ETF such as this, it takes things a step further with the quarterly rebalancing of the asset allocation weights. What I realized was that managing a portfolio of 26 individual stocks, that was taking up a significant amount of mental capacity. Mental load is the term I'm using, whether that's the right term or not to use. But essentially, throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year, what I found occupying my mind was obviously actively researching, my stocks or new stocks to buy, keeping up with the broader economic news, which is something you have to do when you hold individual positions, and of course, rebalancing my portfolio every quarter or so, worrying whether I was on target or not. Now, luckily for me, investing is something that I am and have been passionate about for pretty much my entire life. But as I got older and my priorities changed, my family grew, I became a father, what I came to realize was that I wanted to optimize my strategy for 3 things. Number 1, simplicity. Number 2, automation. This is a big one for me. And number 3, honestly, just keeping the portfolio as hands-off, kind of out of sight, out of mind as humanly possible. This is where an asset allocation ETF checked all the boxes for me. You see, when you're building or constructing a portfolio, either of individual stocks, but absolutely applies to ETFs as well, one of the options you have is to essentially manually construct that portfolio with the variety of different funds getting you the various exposure you desire. For instance, you could pick a Canadian fund for your Canadian allocation or exposure, a separate US targeted fund for the US, an international fund, a fixed income fund, etc., etc. And while I'm not against this approach by any means, if you have the time and interest and care, I think it's an awesome way to do things. The idea behind an asset allocation ETF is it is a one-stop shop or one-stop solution that essentially does the work for you. You see, with ZEQT, you can buy one fund, but get exposure to 6 underlying funds. An S&P 500 ETF, a TSX, Canadian Market Index ETF, international ETF, emerging markets ETF, and even some exposure to the mid and small cap markets to round out the equity exposure. Importantly, if you look at where this fund is allocated, you have this diverse sector exposure, the diversification across various areas of the economy. Today, we're looking at financials coming in at 22% of the portfolio. Information technology or the tech sector at 21%, industrials, consumer staples, healthcare, the list goes on. And keep in mind, while being Canadian myself, I also want the geographical diversification, which I absolutely get. Here we see with ZEQT, a 51% weighting to the American market, a 25 roughly percent weighting to the Canadian market, and then markets abroad North America like Japan, the UK, China, Switzerland, France, Germany. Feel free to pause the screen if you'd like to dive deeper. And importantly, for anyone who's been investing for a while, you know this, that as time goes on, your various funds or holdings, they vary in performance. And a major benefit of an asset allocation ETF is that the rebalancing is done for you. So when I think about what my personal goals and priorities are at this moment, and I'm aiming to be as passive and hands-off as possible, a fund like ZEQT absolutely met all of my needs. Another thing that was very important to me, as I touched on at the top, was to automate my process of investing as much as possible. And within my brokerage account, I have simple automation set up where I purchase this ETF on a weekly basis. This is the approach that works for me. And some investors absolutely prefer to hold multiple ETFs. I love that. But personally, I find focusing my contributions on a single holding, that just takes that whole simplification idea to the whole next level. Now, something I want to talk about briefly, I personally opted to go for ticker ZEQT, which is the All Equity ETF. This is a fund with a 100% allocation to equities because this is what I deemed at this point in my life as a 29-year-old investor. This suited my goals and more or less this phase or stage of my life. My main objective is maximizing my exposure to the equity markets in efforts to grow my portfolio for my retirement. Now, what's very cool about the BMO suite of all-in-one or asset allocation ETFs is there are other variations with different allocations that may be suitable for investors with different goals or objectives. For instance, ZEQT, which is the BMO Growth ETF with an 80% allocation to equity, 20% to fixed income, ZBAL, which is the BMO Balance ETF, 60 equity, 40 fixed income. You even have ZCON, the BMO Conservative ETF, with a 40% weighting to equity and a 60% weighting to fixed income. There are other options you can explore as well, guys, like an ESG option if that's something you're interested in. Case in point is that it's easy to find a solution that you can tailor towards your specific needs as an investor. Now, I want to talk lastly about fees because it is an important aspect to discuss with any investment. And the MER, the management expense ratio on ZEQT, is 20 basis points, 0.20 as of the time of filming this video. What this means for anybody that's very new to this space, it means that for every $100 that I invest into this fund, I pay about 20 cents in fees per year. There is an argument to be made for sure that I could reduce these fees further if I want to optimize further by going out and buying the underlying holdings directly. But this brings me back to the very top of this video where I kick things off with what are my priorities and what am I trying to get out of with my investments. I mentioned my goal was to be streamlined, to keep my investing as simple and easy as possible. And for me, this is a fee that I am more than happy to pay for all the value that this fund provides. I'll include a link down below where you can go and explore ticker ZEQT, along with, of course, the variety of other options provided by BMO ETFs. As always, do your own research, do your own due diligence. I'd love to hear what you guys think down in the comment section below. And once again, thank you to BMO ETFs for sponsoring today's video.